Welcome back to another episode of Raising Tech. Today, I am joined by my good friend, Therese Brinke, who's the Executive Director of Innovation and Impact at Eschaton, one of Northern California's largest nonprofit senior living organizations. Therese is a gerontologist, educator, and innovation leader who's helping reimagine what aging can look like. Her work sits at the intersection of culture, technology, and human connection, leading initiatives in artificial intelligence, robotics, digital health, resident engagement, and person-directed care. Rather than asking, what's the next technology we should buy, Therese challenges organizations to ask a different question. What kind of culture do we need to create so innovation can truly thrive? Today, we'll explore why successful innovation starts long before new technology is introduced, how language shapes cultures, and why putting people before platforms is the key to transforming the future of aging. On a personal note, I've known Therese for probably almost a decade by now. And Therese, I just love I love the passion, I love the energy and everything that you do. You just bring so much light to this industry and just so much great ways of thinking about things that the industry is a better place because of people like you. So I appreciate you making some time with me today and excited to jump into it. So thanks for joining.
Thank you so much for having me, Matt. It is a delight to be here and chatting with you this morning.
Therese, I know I kind of shared a little bit in your intro there, but I always like to ask people, what is your story and how did you end up in senior living?
Well, I'm going to really try not to cry on this one because what my bio doesn't really share is really my story began with my Nana. And I was really fortunate to spend a really good portion of my childhood with her. She was this amazing woman and deeply connected to her family and created a magical childhood for me. And I think looking back at it, she is the reason that I have such an appreciation for older adults. And then when I was about 12 years old, I joined a senior volunteer group. And I was surrounded by these amazing older adults who volunteered every day and were there simply showing up to make the world a better place. And I just felt very connected with that community. And a few years later, my Nana, who I was still very connected to, had a stroke and ended up in a skilled nursing center for rehab. And I spent 3 months with her while she was there. And that summer, I would go to the dining room with her. We would do activities together. We would chat with her roommate. I was there for about 10 hours every day. And my dad looked at me and he was like, "You should really do this for a living." And I was like, "What did I don't know what this is. What do you mean spending time and hanging out with older adults? Like that could be a thing I could do. I don't want to be a nurse." And so I tried to figure out what that could look like. And so I volunteered. I found a volunteer opportunity in Costa Rica and worked at a hogar and which is a home for older adults. And despite very significant language barriers, because my high school Spanish really didn't serve me very well when I was there. I just found this unbelievable sense of community with the people who lived in in this hugar, and no one was separated by ability. It was just this amazing warmth, and I was like, "This is the field I want to be in. These are the people who I want to surround myself with." And I returned home. I started working on my master's in gerontology. I got a job in skilled nursing before joining Eschaton. And that was really, I think, the initial stages that shaped my career. But I think the pivotal moment for me was when I realized that the way that the United States views aging is so drastically different to how other countries are looking at aging. And, here I was just surprised because I learned very quickly that aging was something we fear, we're trying to fix, trying to manage. And the environment just felt so different. And I wanted to do better. I wanted to be part of the change. I didn't want to just work in senior living. I wanted to change the way people thought about aging. And because aging isn't the problem is our environments, our products, and our systems. aren't designed for the full spectrum of human ability in mind. And so I've been super fortunate to just be surrounded by some amazing thought leaders like Dr. Bill Thomas and Jennifer Carson, and working with the Live Well team out of Connecticut to challenge me to think radically different about aging. And I work at an organization that is so open to challenging the status quo and asking difficult questions and thinking differently. And so that's probably what my bio doesn't say. It is a very long answer, but I think important because it has shaped who I am as a professional. Because that feeling that I got at the Hogar is what I'm hoping to create within all of our communities. Just a sense of belonging, and that we all belong, and that's what we all want as we age.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And Therese, we have another commonality that I don't think Spanish in my high school did any justice to me either. So strength in numbers on that one. Um, but no, it's a beautiful sentiment, and it's just an awesome story, and really speaks, for knowing you for so long and hearing that story. It just explains so much about you in a good way, which is just so cool. And I know you sit in such an interesting spot with like overseeing innovation and impact. And everybody in this industry, right? Whatever conference you go to, people are talking about AI and robotics and emerging technology and senior living. But I know you've often said that innovation doesn't begin with technology. I'm wondering, like, what do you mean by that, and why is culture the real starting point?
Matt, are people actually really talking about AI? Do you hear that at conferences?
If I had a dollar for every time I heard about it, Therese, I would be sipping culottes on some beach somewhere right now. So yeah.
Totally. I think that's a great question. I actually think, so often we're having the wrong conversation about innovation. A lot of times when people hear the word innovation, they immediately think about AI or robotics or the latest piece of technology. But in my experience, innovation begins far before any of those things even enter the picture. For me, innovation begins by understanding people, because if we don't understand the people we're trying to serve, we can't possibly know whether the technology is the right answer or whether technology is even needed at all. So before we ever evaluate a technology, we should be asking very different questions, like what is the experience of the older adult we're trying to improve? What challenges are families facing? What are our partners spending time on that doesn't add value to their job? What brings our residents joy? What creates frustration every day? Because there's a lot of things that do. What outcomes are we really actually trying to achieve? And I think for me, one of the most important questions is technology even the right solution? And only after we really understand those experiences should we be asking whether technology has a role to play, because technology should not be the goal. A better experience of aging should always be the goal when it comes to innovation. And technology is one of the many tools that can help us get that there. So at Eschaton, we spend a tremendous amount of time listening before we ever purchase or look at a piece of technology. We do lots of focus groups. We bring residents together, families together, our care partners together, our clinicians together, our operational leaders, our IT departments. My goodness, the list is feeling very long who we reach out to, because honestly, the best ideas don't come from just one person having one perspective. It's multiple perspectives that really contribute to innovation. And I can't tell you how many times I've sat through different technology demos over the years. And, honestly, the companies that impress me that aren't the ones that are, let me list you all the features. They are the companies that are wanting to understand your residents, wanting to understand your workflow. What are the challenges you're trying to solve for? They want to understand your culture. And that, I think, those are the partners that get me really excited, because they're trying to solve for the right problem before they ever present a solution. I remember when you did that, Matt, actually, with Eversound. You really, helped me understand the problem with hearing, and it still stood out to me, because I think that level of curiosity for me tells a lot more about a company than a product demo ever will.
Yeah, and it's a good point. It's funny you mentioned that because I was remembering back to our days, my Eversound days when we worked together, Therese, and I was like, yeah, you guys definitely were super diligent about the process, which is good. I mean, right? Obviously, you want it to be like that to make sure that it has that lasting impact and, making sure you're using technology and using it.
Well, and I think if you can purchase the most advanced technology in the world, but if people don't feel heard, especially your care team, and they don't understand the why and or don't understand the process, adoption's going to be a total uphill battle. But when people feel as though they have helped shape the solution or they've brought the problem to the table, they feel as though they've been listened to and they understand the why behind it and how it improves a person's life, either a care partner or a resident. And there's no longer this resistance to technology because they're part of the process, they're part of that innovation. And that's why I a lot of times like to say that innovation isn't something we can buy. It's something that we have to build together. It's an ecosystem that we all support.
I love that. Yeah, and it reminds me too, like when we used to work with corporate teams and we do a presentation to the communities, like I would tell the corporate teams, I was like, don't roll this out until you get their buy-in and getting them raising their hands and feeling involved and sharing ideas, because that's where like it's gonna take place and take hold and really run with. Um and I
Definitely.
and I know when we think about like culture and all this stuff within our industry, like I think we would both agree that like words matter. And I know that you've said that language is one of the most overlooked drivers of innovation. And, how do the words we choose, both as leaders, as caregivers, as technology partners, influence whether people embrace or truly resist that change?
This is one of those questions that get me on my soapbox, Matt. But I really do believe that language is the most important tool leaders have because language shapes culture, and ultimately, culture shapes whether people embrace change or they resist it. And every day, through the words we choose and the expectations we set, we're telling a story, and we're telling a story about aging when it comes to senior living. And if that story is centered on decline, loss, and everything that someone can no longer do, those messages don't just influence our teams, they influence the people that we serve. And over time, older adults begin to internalize those expectations, and so do the people supporting them. And one of the examples that we give a lot within our Eschaton Academy is imagine someone who is perfectly capable of walking to the dining room with just a little encouragement. And as care partners, we may be completely well intentioned when we offer a wheelchair ride instead. It's quicker, it's easier, it may even seem to some a kinder option because it's quicker and you get them to where they want to go faster. But if we make that decision every single day, we're unintentionally taking away an opportunity for movement, to experience that confidence of getting to where you need to go, of a sense of independence and purpose. And that person hasn't necessarily lost the ability to walk. However, what we did, we changed the expectation. And over time, we contribute to what we teach at Eschaton is learned helplessness, not because anyone intended harm, but because our words and our actions quietly communicated, we've got this, you don't need to. And I think that's one of the greatest leadership lessons in senior living is that the expectations we communicate every day become the culture we create. And so if we consistently are communicating what people can't do, eventually people begin believing that it's true. And what if we communicate possibility? If we focus on strengths and ability and what remains possible, we create a culture where people are feeling empowered to continue learning and growing and trying new things. And so I've seen the same play out with technology. And one of my favorite examples, I'm going to just, give a shout out to a startup that we've been working with is Sync Labs. They're a startup out of the University of Pennsylvania. And before the technology ever went live, their team didn't start talking about how their AI solution was going to transform daily life for our care partners and impact the quality of life for our residents. they came with curiosity. They essentially moved into the community. They sat down with our care partners on every shift and they asked questions like, what slows you down during the day? What's frustrating? What were your roadblocks? How can we build this thing around the way that would actually work for you? And it communicated to the team, you matter. Your voice matters. We want to learn from you. And by the time the pilot even launched, our team didn't feel like it was just like a technology that was being handed to them. They felt like they were a part of creating it, and it made all the difference. We couldn't believe adoption at this community was 90% right out of the gate, and today it's 100%. And sure, the technology improved documentation. We could say all the things the technology did. It gave our care partners, 30 minutes back during their shift. But to me, the most remarkable outcome was that our care teams, our direct team members felt heard. They felt very valued and they were willing to embrace change, even though this was a profoundly big change of changing the way one documents. And, we try to be really intentional about the language that we use every day because it matters. The way that we talk about the experience of our resident matters. The way we talk and introduce technology, it all matters because those expectations influence a behavior and behavior shapes our culture.
I love that. Yeah, it's so powerful of like what that can do. That wasn't that bad on your soapbox, Therese. That was great. I was expecting something like 10 minutes longer. That was awesome.
You're like, okay.
I started working on other things during it. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, I
Um,
figured. I figured.
yeah, yeah. No, I think it's so true of like how we think about this. And I remember one of the times we like really bonded, Therese. We were at a place in Louisville where it said like, asset tracking, referring to the residents, and it's just like, oh, it's just
Asset
so
management
asset
system
asset management system.
or
Yes,
solution.
something like that. Just
Yeah,
referring to the residents as assets. Where talk about just being cold. It's just not. And if you want to build that technology culture, I'll tell you, you can't be talking about your residents as assets for sure.
you cannot because
Um,
we're people. We are people. We are
yeah,
all people.
we are all people. Yeah, I love. Yeah, so true. Um, and I'm gonna go back because I know you kind of have like mentioned this, but obviously, we're continuing to see this technology adoption race, almost I'll call it, especially with a lot of the organizations in senior living today, where they're investing significant time, money, energy into this new technology, these golden spoons that they're seeing at these conferences, and adoption just continues to fall short. I know you're talking with Sync Labs now at 100%, which is awesome. I mean, I'm sure you've seen technology companies come and go, whether they've done awesome stuff with you guys or kind of fell by the wayside. But like from your experience, like what else is missing before the technology is ever introduced?
Yeah, I've been there. I think we all have if we work for a senior living organization, but we all unintentionally fall in love with sometimes the solution before we've understood the problem. And I'm totally guilty of this. I'll see something and I'm like, that is amazing. I want to take that, but I have to practice and I try to practice a little restraint because it's really easy to get caught up and get excited about the possibilities. But if you don't start with really understanding the why or what it is that you are solving for, I feel as though we set ourself up for failure sometimes. And I think we start to imagine all the ways that it could transform your organization, but that's not necessarily, the problem you need to solve for. Any type of technology implementation is going to be a change. And I think we sometimes forget that. I'll sometimes even catch myself being like, well, this is a really small lift, but everything's a lift and everything is a cultural change or a operational change. Every technology comes with some sort of change. And sometimes it might be transformational, but it could maybe change a workflow, a person's responsibility, a communication pattern, or just simply someone's daily routine. And so I think we need to really understand change management before we ever begin the process of rolling out something new. Because if we don't understand those changes before implementation, adoption becomes unbelievably difficult and people become not even dissatisfied with the technology itself, but dissatisfied with the process. It's not necessarily the barriers, the technology, but it's just the process in which it was rolled out. And so I think that goes back to the importance of really doing deep discovery and spending a lot of time asking questions. What problem are we really trying to solve? Who experiences that problem? How does it fit into the daily lives of the residents, if it does at all? How does it fit into the daily lives of our team members? How is it going to affect our team members? Is it going to reduce work, or is it unintentionally going to create more work for perhaps even a short period of time? Because most change does, and who owns it? We've sometimes have also fallen into the trap where pilots are unbelievably successful because we're putting so much energy into supporting that pilot, and then the pilot ends and we don't put in that same amount of intention at scaling the solution, and it's not successful. So if we don't think about who owns it after the pilot ends, adoption is likely going to significantly be impacted. And I think really one of the most important things is, ultimately, what's the why? How is this really going to impact a person's life? Because success is not necessarily determined by how impressive the technology is. And I think that's really important because so often, leadership teams can get really hung up on KPIs and metrics and determining success by how it improves, by these very specific KPIs. But I think it is really still important to recognize, like, how is it improving the experience of the people using it? And that is one of the key benefits of doing some of that deep discovery, because you're talking to the people. You're talking to the people who are utilizing it. You are really understanding what the problem is, because we have realized at times we have found this cool new solution, and then we're starting to talk to people, and then we realize the real issue isn't that we need a new technology. It's the real issue is a workflow issue, or it's a communication issue, or it's an education issue, or it's a cultural issue. And those need to be addressed first. And I think oftentimes we miss those important steps, and then we get trapped in investing a significant amount of time and energy into the wrong problem, because we have to solve the problems first before ever beginning a pilot. And so that's why I really try to be very transparent with technology partners that, you know, sometimes a technology can be unbelievably successful in a lot of different environments. And it's just as important for you to recognize that it may not be successful within your environment because the timing's just not right, or because the workflow just doesn't embed correctly in the workflow. And so that's as important to learn, that it can be successful in a whole lot of different places. We have fallen in the trap of, well, it's successful everywhere. Might as well just go ahead and, skip the pilot phase and scale it. And we're like, oh, wow, this actually doesn't really work as well within our environments as it is elsewhere. And so if we always try to approach innovation from this space of curiosity instead of like this certainty, I think it helps us make better decisions at the get go.
Yeah, it's such a great point, Therese. And I think, the biggest thing I've seen with other, entrepreneurs, people creating companies, even outside this industry, is a lot of people like to build behind a closed door, assume the
Totally.
problems that people are facing, and then build something and bring it out there, and go to market. And people are like, that's not a problem. That's not something we're experiencing, right? So like I remember our early days, probably visited 100 plus communities, just getting feedback, doing demos, crying when we see the residents so engaged back in the day. And it's just like really led to kind of helping to identify that real problem you're trying to solve and what's the value prop, and working with people like you guys to help bring that out. Um, And I know in like various, whether it's talking at conferences or, just our text messages back and forth, you've challenged the industry to try and shift from this asking like, what technology should we buy? And I know you just kind of touched on this a little bit, but really moving to the question of what kind of culture do we want to build? And I'm wondering if you could just share an example of how that mindset has really just changed the outcomes at Eschaton.
Yeah, I love that question because I think at least for Eschaton, that has been a huge part of our innovation journey is focusing on culture. And, we've asked this question of who do we want to become? Because technology shouldn't reinforce your culture or define it. You know, People can look at you and be like, oh, that organization is so innovative. They're adopting so many new technologies. But before we introduce any new technologies, we have to honestly really reflect who we are as an organization because I think it's really difficult to adopt any type of change unless your organization has a growth mindset. And your organization has to be comfortable with experimenting and learning. And that is as important for your leadership team as it is for your frontline team members because we have to demonstrate that every single day. It doesn't, it needs to be embedded in your organization's DNA. Like, is, do you have an organization that's genuinely seeking feedback regularly from your residents, family members, and your team members? And then are we changing based on what we've heard? So many ideas come from survey feedback and it launches into a focus group and diving deeper in for discovery to understand some problems that residents are sharing. And it's important as leaders to create an environment where people feel really safe to fail, like this idea that being able to be innovative and trying something new, that failure's okay mindset, that this idea that all opportunities to challenge ourselves are growth is okay. And it's one of Eschaton's core values, which I think is really defines us to the core of our DNA because those questions have very little to do with technology. And I say one of the reasons that we are at the place of being able to adopt new technologies and being able to innovate is because of our culture that we've constantly been intentional about building. And one of my favorite examples at Eschaton has nothing to do with really technology at all. But for years, the staff development arm was under innovation because we were redefining what education looked like within our organization. We recognized, and our team members were telling us that the health stream videos that they were were watching for new hire training didn't reflect our culture, didn't reflect our philosophy, and didn't align with who we are. And so we spent 2 years listening to residents and families and care partners and our leaders to understand how do we want to define our culture? And then we completely changed our approach to education. And, I think so many organizations, if you're thinking like, oh, let's launch a staff development arm, you start with, let's purchase the learning management system. And, but that wouldn't have been as successful. That wouldn't have had the fingerprints of our team all over it. And that wouldn't have required us to redesign and reconsider all of our curriculum. Simply purchasing a learning management system would have been a lot faster and probably a lot less painful and a lot less messy. But we really wanted our team members to feel the difference when they went through our training. And that was why developing the Eschaton Academy was really important for us. And it took years of blood, sweat, and tears to launch it and have it be its own living thing. And so, the technology was just one really small part of that vision. But to me, the difference between like adopting technology and building an innovative culture, that's to me, that's what it is. It's like technology should only be a component. The culture is the foundation that makes everything else possible.
Yeah, it's so true. Like you know, you go back to the LMS, right? Like, let's get an LMS platform. Every provider's probably said something to that degree or some sort of training and all that sort of stuff. But really, you know, what's the goal of it? What's the vision of it? How does it kind of play into everything else that's going on there? And really trying to get this culture of, self improvement and wanting to become better. Because if people are just going through, some of the trainings, I plead the fifth if I've ever done this on any virtual trainings and just clicking the boxes, going through as fast as possible, it's not doing anybody any good, right?
No.
Um, yeah.
Well,
And
and it's not tied, sure, it's more about it's checking a compliance box. And, for us, it's like how do you define your culture, and how is that culture and philosophy weaved into everything that it is that you do? Because if you have the same, at Eschaton, we call it the one voice. If we have the same one voice that carries a team member through their entire experience, there should be continuity and consistency with what that one voice sounds like. And that ripples from, the highest leaders to our managers, and to the leaders at the community level. That one voice needs to be consistent.
mm, yeah, I love that. One voice. I feel like it's like a Friday Night Lights slogan or something in the TV
We have
show.
shirts. No, we
There
don't
you go.
actually
I
have
like it. I
shirts.
like it. Hey, it wouldn't be our first time wearing the same shirt, Therese, as
That's
we wore the
that's
no F
true.
bomb shirts for the
No F
listeners out there.
bombs.
Yeah.
Yeah, Lola would be very disappointed if we didn't give
Yeah,
her
of
her
course.
shirts a
Of course. Um, and I think throughout this conversation and just getting to know you, Therese, too, I think there's this big shift in the way of thinking around technology in senior living. I know you often describe it as a tool for empowerment, right? Rather than simply a way to manage decline. And depending on what technology company you're out there, they're probably leaning in one side or the other for the messaging. But I'm wondering from like your perspective, like what does that philosophy look like in practice and how does it change the experience for older adults and caregivers alike?
That's a great question, and I do think we had a very similar conversation in Louisville during that same visit around tools of empowerment and how Eversound, I really felt, how you talk about it, it's a tool of empowerment, and I I think I was saying the same thing 10 years ago. I'm so consistent.
Hey, that's all you can ask for people, consistency and,
One of the things, the reason that I get on a soapbox really quite frequently about these tools of empowerment rather than, you know, creating things that help manage decline, you know, because of we live in a society that just focuses, we're so ageist, we're so ableist, and we're so focused on decline. And we need to change that narrative. Aging brings change. That's simply part of life. Uh, People experience physical change. They've experienced cognitive change. They experience hearing loss, vision loss, changes in mobility. And technology should absolutely be able to help us navigate those realities better. But it's not where the story ends for me, because technology shouldn't just simply compensate for what someone has lost. It should expand the possibilities of what remains possible. And that's when I get really excited about technology as empowerment, because I don't think of the technology first. I think of the person. And I think about just in my 14 years at Eschaton, I think about the resident living with macular degeneration. Her name was Joyce, who simply just wanted to know what time it was by asking Alexa without having to ask anyone else. That's empowerment. You know, we could just say it's an amenity. And I think about, the way say, Amazon sells devices as an amenity. It's not. It's a voice assistant. This is an accessibility tool. And there's so many examples, like the resident who's living with forgetfulness, who sets reminders so they don't miss their favorite art class, or their care partner sets reminders so they don't miss their art class. That's a tool of empowerment. And this was an awesome one. We have a longevity collective at one of our communities, and we get together and I host focus groups with our residents. And this was a resident just a couple of months ago who was sharing they use AI to better understand their medications and their lab results so they can have a more informed conversation with their primary care physician. It's like, that's a tool of empowerment. That's amazing. And, it's no different than the wearable that helps us recognize subtle changes in someone's health before it's a crisis, or AI reducing documentation so care partners can spend more time building relationships. I mean, we can just keep going on, but it's the narrative of how we talk about different solutions. We're so focused on, and so often the narrative of decline is what is leading stories, that it's not empowering for older adults. It's not empowering for the people supporting older adults. And it makes it much more difficult to see the adoption that we all want to see when we are simply just trying to manage decline better. And so the goal should never be to fight aging or to reverse it. It's just about supporting people to live better and live with independence, and to feel empowered that they can navigate life regardless of the changes that come their way.
Mm, I love that. And Therese, I'm wondering, obviously, over this, you know, illustrious career that you've had thus far, hopefully illustrious is a good word. And as I say it, I'm like, oh my gosh, that is a bad connotation. It's like when I used to call people infamous, thinking it meant very famous, and I came to learn that meant famous for wrong reasons. So sorry, people out there. But you've worked with so closely with residents over the years. I'm just like wondering, like, what's something older adults have taught you about technology that surprised you or really even just challenged your own assumptions?
Man, so much. I think they have challenged my assumptions so much over the years, from, the excitement that older adults have when when truly technology is designed with them in mind. We have had the opportunity to, we've had, companies like Google come to Eschaton and say, "Hey, can we come and pitch an idea? We want to get feedback." And I absolutely loved that Google came to us and said, "Hey, we have this idea. We're trying to, emerge in senior living, and we have this idea." Well, they met with our residents, they met with our team members and focus groups. They spent 8 hours with us asking a ton of questions. And at the end of the day, I was like, "Hey, how'd that go?" And they're like, "You know what? That was really great. We're going to shut down this project." And I was like, "Really?" Like, they're like, this was so valuable. We really recognized that we were not designing the right thing, and we really didn't understand the problem. And I just appreciate that older adults have the ability to ask. They have this life experience that they apply to their level of questions that is so deeply wise, and which is one of the reasons that I love to have many of our technology partners come and talk to our older adults first, to because the questions that come out from conversations with them make me just think differently about how we use technology on an everyday basis. Like Joyce, for example, like I would never have really, when we first were asked by residents to adopt voice assistants, we thought that would be a very a nice amenity. I really thought of it as like, this is a nice feature. And then the more we started seeing it in use, the more I began to understand, like, no, this is an accessibility tool. When people like Joyce, when we were updating Alexas and she was like, "Are you taking this away?" I'm like, "No, no, 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 we're just giving you a new one." She's like, "Good, because I depend on her." And so I have been challenged for 10 years to really think very differently about how we embrace technology, and this very real openness to navigating change, because I've seen a lot of older adults who are so open to adopting new things. A great example, we had an opportunity to participate in a clinical study for smart toilets. And when I met with the CEO, I was like, and this Vic with Toy Labs, I was like, "Vic, you know what? I, I will put this out to residents. Like, you can pitch it." And we had so much interest. And I thought smart toilets at the time would be a really difficult sell. But we had residents, and the way that they talked about it, it was this tool of empowerment. And the only piece of feedback at the time was that they didn't get to see the data. And that was what really clicked for me, this like back to this narrative and empowerment is that we are open, many older adults are very open to technology as long as it's theirs, it empowers them, it gives them the tools that they need when they want it. And, back to the the resident who was sharing, like, I love AI because it gives me great information about how to have better conversations with my doctor. I'm embracing this thing because it's helping me feel more empowered. And like how neat is that? And there are just so many countless examples that I could talk about with residents that I've just like it's like a mic drop moment every time I feel like I'm I meet with a resident because it changes it changes our way of thinking. And I think it's also really important to recognize how each person is still so unique, and I think we learned a lot of this with voice technology because what we saw when we deployed out voice technology across all of our communities, residents in assisted living were loving it, and our numbers in independent living were actually a lot less lackluster. And so, I was like, "What? I gotta understand why." And so I started talking to residents because I had some assumptions, but again, I don't like having assumptions. I like to go to the people. And I'll never forget this one resident. She was like, "You want me to ask? I have two perfectly good legs, and you want me to ask a voice assistant to turn on the lights? That's my exercise." And I was like, "You are absolutely right." So technology is never a one size fits all. And I think the moment we start believing that it is the moment we lose our openness to considering the possibilities. And I think that's been my biggest thing is that over 10 years, nothing surprises me anymore. And that we have to still see every single person as a person and understand how is this piece of technology going to benefit this individual? Because if you don't start with the need, if you don't understand what their needs are, so for our residents in independent living, the narrative became, access to information. They wanted more ways to, on the go access to information. Um, than our residents in assisted living. Smart home was very important for our residents in assisted living. So if you don't start with the need and the understanding the true need or the problem you're solving, it's it's probably not going to be really successful.
It really resonates with me too, because I think, I've been to some of these conferences, I've talked to some of these people, and there's this feeling they're like, my residents don't want to use technology. And I almost find it's completely the opposite, where the residents want to use the technology. And I find the staff is usually the ones that are more resistant to it at times. Even with like AI nowadays, it's kind of wild to see what that looks
Well,
like.
and I think is that because, again, I think it goes back to culture. It has nothing to do with the technology. And so if you have an organization where the culture doesn't have that acumen for, trying new things, then it can be really scary to adopt new technology
Mm,
and thinking about and honestly, I'm reminded all the time, like, there can be concerns from legality standpoints, and so we can, all of these, like, why it might not be successful, I think create, an internalized message of, like, why something wouldn't be successful. And it's like, well, my residents aren't going to really adopt it. So I think, there's so many different messages like, oh, what will this look like for workflow? What will DSS think about it? And so there are so many pieces and elements that go into any type of change that I think it's just at the end of the day, it's kind of scary.
yeah. Change is scary. Change is inevitable.
Just scary.
And then final question for you, Therese.
Yeah.
Looking ahead, what gives you the most optimism about the future of aging, and what advice would you give to senior living leaders who really want to foster innovation without losing sight of the human experience?
Ooh. So I think, and I don't know about you, I know going to conferences can be sometimes a little exhausting, but I think this is
You're
just
telling
because of how
me.
much, yeah, how exciting and new. There's a lot going on, and there's a ton of momentum, especially in the gerotechnology space. And, we're seeing innovations in, AI, wearables, robotics, passive monitoring, smart home, cognitive health, communication that just didn't exist a few years ago. And, I'm still really excited because I think so many of these tools have the potential to help older adults live with greater independence and help our care partners spend more time building relationships and helping organizations deliver more proactive, person directed care. And so that's super exciting to me beyond anything. Um, and I think what's the most interesting to me is that we're getting to a place where we're starting to imagine a connected ecosystem where different technologies work together to create a more complete picture of a person's well-being instead of just, you know, residents and staff managing a collection of disconnected tools. If we, have had another ED who's like, don't get me another dashboard. I don't, I'm so sick of having so many different disconnected tools. And I think the industry as a whole feels the same way. And I think, at least I'm hoping, where the future is headed is this more connected ecosystem. But my word of caution still is that there's also a whole lot of noise still. And it's really tempted to get like, "Oh, that's so neat, and I wanna adopt it right now." But, every day there's another type of AI tool, another sensor, another robot, another dashboard, and, companies are just still promising to transform our industry, and if we are not very careful, we can spend a whole lot of time, chasing the technology instead of really focusing on what's really important and, like, solving the problem at hand. And so I always say, this is the greatest time, I think, is just start with the people. That's my advice to people. Start with your people, sit with your residents now, get to know them, talk about them, figure out what problems there are to solve, and spend time with the care partners and really spend time getting to know them and walk with them. See the redundancies for yourself and, talk with the family members. If you're not doing pulse surveys are really important and just simply walking within the neighborhoods to understand how a community operates day to day. I think sometimes there's this disconnect between leadership and the day to day, and it's so important for us to listen much more than we talk because the best problems aren't solved in a conference room. They're solved when we're talking to people. And it's, solved when we have a diverse set of perspectives that are contributing to that innovation. And so a lot of times we don't need technology. We just need a little bit of re education. And sometimes we need to adopt a new workflow or just be having a different conversation altogether. And at the end of the day, it's important that we don't always need another product. Sometimes we need to just focus on really our current culture and how it's operating in the day to day and what is our comfort level with getting a little messy because that takes a lot of I think that's the best thing that you can prepare your organization of, just get people comfortable with some form of change and being okay with failure is really important. And I think that's it because at the end of the day, it's just about the people. And if you have those relationships in place with the people and there's trust, your residents trust you, your care partners trust you. When you go to roll out the technology, it's a lot easier and you see adoption is a lot higher because you have the right culture. You have this change resilient culture that really embraces change because they understand the why and they understand that it comes from a place to improve the lives of the residents and also improve the team members' daily experience as well.
Mm, I
And
love
that goes
that.
a long way.
Well, Therese, I just want to thank you for making so much time and sharing all of this, all of your learnings in such an awesome episode. And just grateful for your friendship, grateful for everything you do for the industry. And thank you from me and everyone else in this industry. Thank you so much.
Well, I just thank you, Matt. Thank you for the opportunity to be on your podcast. I know we've been talking about it for years, and it's just really exciting to be on it and to have a chat with you because it's always so fun to chat with you. It would be a little bit better if we had beers though.
I've been drinking over here. I don't know about you, but
Well, to the next time.
You can find us online at raisingtechpodcast.com, where you can see all of our episodes and contact us to provide feedback or submit an episode idea. We are on social media everywhere at Raising Tech Podcast. If you enjoy Raising Tech, please leave us a review and share with a friend. Music is an original production by Tim Riesig, one of our very own Parasol Alliance employees. As always, thank you for listening.